It was a foolish idea. The frontier had been relatively quiet for almost a year, so there was little need for an expedition across the river. The barbarians were mostly sticking to their side, and aside from a couple of small-scale raids, there was nothing they were doing to significantly threaten the security of the frontier. However, the Ducks claimed that the scattered raids were the vanguard to a much larger attack, and he soon used it as an excuse to send an expedition to punish the barbarians for their incursions into Roman territory. Many of us old centurions knew better than to fall for his declaration. We believed that it was just a reckless attempt by the Ducks to impress the troops of the Ripensis legions, so that we would declare him as Augustus. After all, ambition often comes before basic sensibility. From the Rhine River all the way to the Danube River, military leaders have been making extravagant gestures in order to show the people they had the qualities of a good emperor. We knew that this was just another attempt to attain the purple. However, there was little we could do except grumble at the idea that we had to leave our secure forts and march out of the frontier and onto hostile land. Crossing the river with the 2 other legions under the Ducks' command, we left behind a single cohort to defend our frontier fort as we set forth to hunt down the barbarians. The next few days were largely uneventful, with our force moving from village after village, quickly defeating the small pockets of barbarian resistance and eliminating their leaders. By the end of the 6th day, we had successfully burnt down 8 villages and captured or executed 4 barbarian chiefs. However, the Ducks was unimpressed by these events, as he saw nothing glorious over such small achievements. We knew what he wanted was to engage a large barbarian host, and we feared that this desire might lead to reckless leadership. As we would soon find out, our worst predictions ended up becoming true. On the 12th day of the expedition, after capturing yet another village, the son of a local chieftain had passed on important information in exchange for the safety of his family. The Ducks agreed to this, and because of this, we learned that a long time ago, an incursion by one of our old famous generals once roamed this area, but was cut down in ambush at a nearby forest. The standards of his legion were said to still be lying on the very ground they fell, serving as a monument to passing barbarians, as a reminder of their people's achievement. Learning of this and realizing the prestige the recovery of 3 legionary standards would bring him, the Ducks immediately made preparations for a march towards the said forest. Despite the clear danger imposed by marching into a dense and unfamiliar forest, the Ducks told us his conviction in retrieving the lost standards was firm and could not be swayed, whether it was due to overconfidence, because of our recent small successes, or because of his lust for glory, with him probably remembering the praises Germanicus attained after recovering Varus' lost standards. One thing was for sure: the Ducks would not stop until he made a name for himself. Taking the barbarian with us, our force used him as a guide to lead us to the said forest. Marching out of camp the very next day, my legion found itself at the head of the column, just behind the Ducks' own cavalry escort. Marching across open ground, we soon caught sight of the forest the barbarian was talking about. Looming in the distance, the tall trees and dense undergrowth was enough to tell every centurion and experienced legionnaire that the forest was a death trap. However, urged on by the Ducks and our legates, we continued and soon entered its dark and confined interior. As we marched into it, a light fog seemed to form around us. This was not a cause for concern at first, But as we went on, it seemed to become thicker and thicker, till it became impossible to see anything more than a few paces ahead of us. From my position, I could no longer see anything past the row of men from the century in front of me, as the towering figures on the mounted ducks and his cavalry were now shrouded in fog. Only the frightened sounds their horses were making as they went on told me that they were still somewhere at the head of the column. Using the rear row of the century in front of us as a guide, we continued in our advance with growing anxiety and uncertainty. Taking precautions, I ordered my men to be on alert, knowing that we were perfect targets for an ambush. It was hard not to curse the ducks at that moment, since it felt like we were about to add 3 more lost standards for Rome. Making good use of my senses, I listened to my surroundings to help ensure that nothing out of the ordinary was approaching. If an ambush was coming in to attack us, then I wanted to at least be aware of it. If a barbarian came charging down, I would have my spatha ready to cut him down. As I listened to the environment around me, I couldn't help but hear the rhythmic chorus of marching feet and the reassuring sound of armor clanking around me. It gave this aura of safety, knowing that your legion was with you. However, just as the sound was helping me feel safer in this dreaded forest, it suddenly disappeared, all at the same time. The sound of marching legionnaires and bumping armor stopped, as a dead silence filled my ears. Looking ahead, I also noticed that the legionnaires ahead of me were gone now, as the fog grew thicker to the point that all I saw was white. Knowing that something was wrong, I immediately called out to those around me, but received no reply. Uncertainly, I extended my arm to the side, hoping to make contact with the legionnaire that was supposed to be next to me. I felt nothing but cold air. It seemed that I was alone now, in the fog, with the 5,000 men who had been with me, now gone. Doing my best not to lose my sanity, I tried to hold back my fear and instead follow my instincts and training. Raising my scutum and drawing my spatha, I cautiously began moving back, hoping to find my way out of the cursed forest. A part of me wanted to call for help, in hopes of drawing in the attention of other legionnaires that may be near me. With such a thick fog, then it would not have been reasonable to think that we all just got separated and didn't realize it until it was too late. However, I knew this was a lie. Even if we were blinded by fog, I should have still been able to hear the footsteps and armor. Something else was going on here, yet I did not know what it was. Deciding to keep silent instead, I did my best to make my steps as quiet as possible. Attracting attention was the last thing I wanted to do during that time, as I now doubted that there would be fellow legionnaires around me. If I made too much noise, the only thing I would be attracting was hostility. Trying my best to follow the path we had taken, I soon found it impossible to figure out where I was. I was no longer sure if I was heading out of the forest, or if I was going deeper into it. Despite this, I kept moving, as it was better than just staying still in this foggy environment. I did not know how much time passed, but at one point I began to see a red glow ahead of me. Having nowhere else to go, I decided to head towards it, hoping it might be a band of legionnaires that had made camp. I approached the glow slowly, cautiously as before, knowing that there was also a chance that it was the barbarian camp. Getting closer towards the glow, I felt things start to become warmer, while the fog slowly thinned down with each step. As I continued moving forward and anxiously waited to see what was making the red glow, I felt something grab me on the foot, causing me to trip and fall onto the ground. Falling flat, I ended up losing my grip on my scutum and spatha. Now in a panic, I tried to make a grab for my weapon, only to be prevented by whatever was gripping my foot. Cold, scaly. The thing gripping my foot suddenly pulled me, forcing my body to scrape the rocky ground. Managing to get a look behind me, a claw-like hand was holding onto my foot, while a reddish tree branch-like arm led from the claw and into the fog. Following this arm, I failed to see the body it was attached to. However, I did see the face of that terrible creature who had me, and the sight of it nearly made my spirit leave my body. I couldn't help but mutter a curse and prayer at what I saw, and the horror of it still reveals itself every time I close my eyes. Evil, red eyes like the glowing coal embers were placed in eye sockets that looked like deep, dark pots. Staring intensely at me, I couldn't help but look away from its gaze, only for my own eyes to fall into its terrible grin. Smiling widely, the huge mouth of this creature formed a crescent that bared its teeth. Its teeth seemed to be in the 100, if not the thousands, as layer after layer and row after row of teeth went on and on. One who sees it could only assume that teeth continued into the throat of this hideous creature. Floating above where the arm leads to, the rest of its body shrouded by fog, I wasted a good few seconds staring at it, but realizing that my life would be lost if I continued to let the fear freeze me, I quickly shifted myself so that I was being dragged on my side instead of my front. Then, grabbing onto the dagger I always kept strapped to me, I used whatever strength I could harness in order to pull my upper body up and jab at the arm of the creature. Despite looking hard like a wooden branch and despite feeling like scales, the arm was soft and vulnerable, with my dagger easily penetrating it. The stab caused the creature to lose its grip on me and let go of my leg. Taking my opportunity, I quickly got up and started running away from the creature, as it let out an indescribable shriek of pain that nearly popped my ears. Heading towards the red glow, I threw away any hesitation I had earlier about it. Romans or barbarians, any group of people would be better than spending another moment with the creature. I would soon come to regret my decision to go to the red glow. Getting closer to it, I soon noticed that the fog was completely gone, but I was unable to enjoy the lifting of the blinding shroud, as I now found that my whole surrounding was covered by a red glow. It created a heavy haze similar to a fog, but was transparent, and had the effect of reflecting a landscape that depicted a look like hell. But my worry towards this red glow did not last long, as the lifting of the fog revealed a true horror that almost made the earlier creature's face seem tolerable. Trees, made out of bones, rose from the ground. Skinned corpses of fellow legionnaires hanging from the branches with ropes made out of their intestines, and pools of blood dotted all over the ground. The landscape before me was one of nightmares. I tried to look away, but wherever I turned my head, that awful sight of gruesomely killed legionnaires filled my eyes. Making the situation worse was the terrible stench that filled my nostrils, as the odor of death and unimaginable foulness filled the air. I was never one to weep over the horrors of battle, but the tortured bodies of my friends made me shed a tear as I halted in my tracks. It was terrible and disgusting, and I was not sure how to react to it all. Surrounded by such horror and death, it was hard to find out what I should do next. The horrible shrieking sound from behind encouraged me to move forward. Not wanting to turn around and look, I took a step forward and prayed that there was an exit to this field of horror. Moving my way across the field and going past the pools of blood, I felt the terrible feeling of being watched. Looking around cautiously, I soon realized the reason for this. eyes falling on the hanging bodies. I saw that all of them had their heads towards me. As I continued to move across the field, they continued to fix their gaze on me, following me as they moved. A chill ran through my body as they stared, and the sensation brought by their empty eyes, staring at me, created an indescribable feeling that made me uneasy. Wherever I went in that field, I knew they would be staring, following me with judging looks. Making matters worse was the return of the terrible creature I had encountered earlier, appearing out of the hazy red glow. The eyes and the teeth-filled mouth revealed itself behind me. One noticeable difference on it was that it was no longer smiling, and instead revealed a large frown. Like earlier, it seemed like the creature was nothing but a face, its body concealed in the red light that made it hard to see. Not wanting to waste time studying it for far too long, I began doubling my pace, hoping to get away from it. I no longer had a weapon to defend myself if it caught me, since I had left my dagger jabbed in its arm in my escape attempt. If I was caught once more, I would have no chance of escaping this time. Planning to head to the nearest tree line, I hoped to escape the field and somehow find a way out of the forest. With how terrible and fast things were going during that time, I did not have a real plan, but I knew my priority was to get out of that forest. I do not remember how long it took me, but I remember feeling exhausted as I approached the tree line. Using the excitement that kept me going, I kept my pace fast, not looking back to see how close the creature was behind me. However, to my utter horror, just as I was about to reach the tree line, another face emerged between the trees, smiling and staring at me. It moved out of the tree line and went straight for me, halting in place and feeling defeated. I took a quick glance behind me and saw that the first creature was still there, still heading for me, and now very close. With no other choice, I darted off to the side, towards an area where the pools of blood were larger and densely packed. I would admit that this was not the best of choices, but in my moment of panic, I did not have time to contemplate where to go. I just hoped that I could reach the tree line beyond it, and pray that I would not get blocked before I got there. My lungs already felt like they were on fire from all the exertion I'd been doing, but I did my best to ignore it. This was a matter of life and death, and I could only imagine the horrors I would endure if those creatures caught me. At first I was doing well in my run, as I weaved between the pools, not wanting to get bogged down by stepping into them. However, my luck did not last long, and I soon tripped and fell into one of the pools. I coughed out the blood I was unfortunate enough to take into my lungs from the fall. As I lifted myself up from the pool, the one I fell on was not too deep, and it was low enough for me to easily sit up from and look around my surroundings. To my horror, I now found myself surrounded by the creatures, with one seemingly coming from each direction. Hearing a loud shriek, I turned to face one of the creatures and saw the teeth-filled frown of the first creature I had encountered. Despite the lack of facial features, it looked as if this one was more determined to get me than the others. Feeling defeated, I tried to force myself to get out of the pool and make another attempt, but with them all around, I knew that there was no more escape. In my desperation, I tried to look around the pool for any rock I could use as a weapon. Searching the edge of the pool and then the shallow pool itself, I soon grabbed onto something hard, gripping it and needing a lot of strength in order to lift it. I was shocked to see the bones of a severed arm. But it was not the arm that took my full attention, as I soon saw that the bones were grasping something. Held tightly in its skeletal fingers was a golden pole. Its color seemed so clear, even with that terrible light. Studying the pole, I soon realized that this was no ordinary pole, but instead, a legionary standard. Looking at its end, I saw that the golden standard held a magnificent and beautiful mold of the Cairo on its top. Below the Cairo was a banner, one that looked pristine despite having been bathed in a pool of blood. Staring at the banner, I read out the words inscribed on it. "In this sign, conquer." With eyes wide, I quickly realized what this standard was. This was no ordinary legionary standard, but instead the vexillum of Emperor Constantine. I had heard many stories of the standard's power in battle, and how it aided the now-dead emperor in achieving his victories, and it was speculated that it was buried with the emperor when he passed. And yet, it was here before me now. Hearing the shrieking get louder, and realizing how close creatures were to me now, I quickly ceased any further reverence toward the standard and moved to grab it from the decapitated skeletal arm. Despite being nothing but a blunt spear, it was a better weapon than nothing. I was not sure how well I would fare with that weapon against such creatures, but I was determined to fight and not let myself be captured without an attempt. The moment I grabbed the standard, a sharp stinging sensation immediately hit my arm, forcing me to pull back. I was confused by this, but I did not let it stop me for too long, as I soon firmly wrapped my hand on the standard and pulled it off the skeletal remains. Holding on to it hard, the pain once more returned, as if it were a piece of metal that had been heated. Unsure of the reasoning behind this heat, but fearing the creatures more than suffering from the pain, I held on to the standard with both hands as I tried to ignore the pain, since there was no other choice. To my astonishment, the creatures halted in their approach towards me, surrounding me in a circle and staring at me with eyes that showed hunger. They stopped where they were and did not move any further. Studying them with confusion, I noticed that they were all frowning now as they held their place. Realizing that they had halted because of the banner, I soon decided to test if this was true by moving out of the pool and approaching one of the creatures. As quickly as I approached, the creature and those next to it fell back, with its frown growing deeper. It stared at me and hissed, backing away at my approach. Feeling hope rise within me, I cautiously directed myself towards the nearest tree line, making my way past the creatures, keeping my eyes on them as I made my way. I could see them shoot out their terrible arms in attempts to grab me, but quickly pulled them back before it could reach me. Turning my gaze towards the banner, I saw nothing special happening to it except for the stinging burning sensation I felt. Yet, despite how ordinary it looked, it was protecting me and keeping the creatures away. Holding to the standard tighter, despite the pain it brought me, I kept it close to me as I moved away and exited the field. The creatures trailed me the entire way, but they soon disappeared from sight as I entered the tree line and once more encountered a world of fog. With my vision impaired by the environment, my movement was slow and cautious. Still not knowing where to go, I just kept going straight and prayed that I would soon find an exit. Occasionally, I heard shrieks in the distance, alerting me that the creatures were still there and waiting for me to let go of the standard. But I never took my hands away from it, and so I blindly navigated the foggy forest, with the sounds of horror and fear of the creature flooding my senses. Making matters worse was the feeling of weakness I was encountering as I carried the banner. I was not sure if it was because of my exhaustion or because the standard sucked away my strength in order to protect me, but whichever it was starting to become more and more difficult to walk and carry the standard. I wandered aimlessly inside the forest until I noticed that the fog was starting to fade, feeling hope, but also fear. I continued to move towards where the fog was thinnest, hoping to find the end of the forest soon instead of the field of horror. To my joy, I soon saw open ground that was clear of skinned bodies or pools of blood. I had escaped, but I was not completely free yet. I may have been out of the forest, but I was still stuck deep within barbarian territory, with nothing but the standard as my weapon. It would be a long trek back to the friendly side of the frontier, and after all we had done to the barbarians, I was sure that they would not look too kindly at a lone Roman legionnaire. The journey back to the frontier fort was hard, and it took me 5 days before I encountered a patrol of explorators from one of the legions that stayed to defend the frontier. Upon my return, I was hailed a hero for retrieving the banner of Constantine. I tried to tell them about what happened in the forest, but most just stared at me as if I was mad. They merely waved off my account as nothing but a delusional fantasy brought on by my exhaustion after a terrible fight with the barbarians. But that is not true. I could not have imagined any of that. So I write this now, so that what happened would not be forgotten. There are dangers across that river that are far beyond our understanding. We should never forget that. This account was found on papers discovered in an ancient Roman fort at the Danube River. Sent to us by the archaeological team, these papers were just a portion of many other recently unearthed artifacts and documents. Assigned to me for translation, I was first confused about the events portrayed, and I wondered if this is really true. One of my colleagues speculates that this could be a fictional piece of work, written by a bored officer in one of the forts. With all the unbelievable claims written on these documents, I initially thought that he was right. However, a recent message from the archaeological team has made me question my colleague's theory. You see, earlier today, the team excavating the fort found another artifact. It was a late Roman army legionary standard. Sending us images, we were surprised to see that it was an intact golden standard. Attached to the standard was a banner that somehow managed to remain in perfect condition despite being found buried beneath one of the abandoned buildings in the fort. On the banner were the words, "In this sign, conquer